How many of you are following the World Series? Raise your hand. Okay, so how many of you saw at the end of Game 2 that leaping catch made by Andrew Benedetti? Wow, only a few. All right, so I'm going to encourage you to go back to the computer, Google it, and view it because it's amazing. It's amazing. It's the kind of thing that only a young person who's been training his whole life could do. I imagine in my dreams that I could do a catch like that every once in a while. But it was in midair. It was in the middle of a leap. He had one leg all the way forward. He had one leg all the way back. And while he's going in that direction, he turned around and just raised his hand up like a ballerina, just caught it, came down full of grace, and just pretended that it was just another day, like no big deal. And so, taking that in consideration, I want you to consider the following conversation between a reporter and this left fielder at the end of Game 2. By the way, totally fabricated. I don't want you to think that this conversation really happened before we get to it. But the reporter said, "Andrew Benedetti, please tell me, how'd you make that catch today?" And he goes, "Well, when we were in the locker room, you know, as a team, we always go ahead and then we've got this chant, and we go ahead and we pump each other up with this chant, and we encourage each other as we chant along." And he goes, "Yeah, but fantastic. But when you were out in the game, when you were in the field and you saw the ball coming, what is it that was going through your mind?" Well, Andrew Benedetti said, "Well, we were in the locker room, and our coach has his blackboard, and he draws these lines with the chalk, and when the ball's going a certain direction, I know I got to go in that direction to catch it." And he goes, "That's nice, but tell me, as you were making the catch, what is it that you were thinking about?" And he goes, "Well, my coach, right before the game started, he whispered some words of inspiration to me." And they said, "Really? What did he say?" And he said, "Go get him." That's how I made the catch. So what's the disconnect there? All right, the reporter wants to talk about the game, and the left fielder's talking about the locker room and the coach. And in this fabricated story, I bring it up as an analogy that church is to life what the locker room is to the game. The real game is out there, but you come here week after week, Sunday after Sunday, to listen to the music, to be part of the prayers, to be a part of a community of faith, and all together, along with the words of inspiration, you're able to go out into the world in what is and might be very likely a difficult week so that you could be at the top of your game. And week after week you come here, and some weeks you come here knowing that you did a fantastic catch earlier in that week, and you did something that was just amazing, or sometimes you come back knowing that you dropped the ball and you were a disappointment. But nonetheless, we come back and we encourage each other, and you get the strategy, you get the game plan here at church as to how to face a difficult week. Christianity is practiced out there. And I say that because too often I talk to people once they find out what my profession is, and they say, "Yeah, I go to church." And it's almost like they feel that they're on the test at that moment. They feel like, "Oh God, here's this pastor, and he's testing me, and I better say the right thing, and the right thing is what he wants to hear." And they think I want to hear that they go to church. And by the way, I say, "Good job, thank you. You know, I'm so glad you go to church." And quite frankly, it could be any church. But what's really more important is what they do after church. What's really more important is once we leave church, how do we live our life? How do we practice Christianity out there day after day on the 24/7? Today's gospel story is one that is, at first glance, unremarkable. It's one that just may not impress us. By now, by chapter 10 of the Gospel of Mark, we've seen Jesus do so many different miracles. We've seen him walk on water, calm storms, do several exorcisms. He's healed all sorts of people in so many different ways. And so here he comes to this blind man who's screaming out, "Have mercy on me," and he heals him and says, "Your faith has made you well." And quite frankly, we've seen this so many different times that the story actually becomes a little bit forgettable. When I read the story, I'm reminded of the other story that's actually much better. It's in the Gospel of John, of Jesus healing another blind man. And on that one, it's like Jesus is doing it the right way. He goes down, he picks up some dirt, and he puts the saliva on his hand, and he mixes it together, and then like a shaman, he puts the paste on his eyes. And then afterwards, there's even a conversation, a dialogue as to what does it mean to be healed, and who was the sinner. And the story is just so amazing that when I get to this one and I compare it, I go like, something's missing here. I don't know what's going on. And it becomes quite obvious at that point that the story is clearly not about Jesus. This story is clearly not about the miracle, because it comes and goes like a blip. The story is really more about Bartimaeus. The story is really about the receiver, the person who got it. And for those of us who know the different disciples, Bartimaeus is the last one. Bartimaeus is the very, very last disciples. He was healed, his eyes opened, and then instead of going back to his life, to his family, or to whatever, he followed Jesus along the road. And there might be 100 different reasons for that, but the fact is that's what he did. And then we know that Jesus, from this place, went on to Jerusalem. They were in Jericho, and they were in Jericho walking back to Jerusalem, because in Jerusalem, it was going to be the Passover. And the festival of the Passover is something that no first century Jew wants to miss. So crowds of people who had just listened to Jesus preach, just heard all his teachings, were going to Jerusalem for the festival of Passover, when all of a sudden Bartimaeus was healed. And he decided, you know what, I'm going to go too. And I'm going to go and I'm going to follow Jesus. The story is clearly not about Jesus or the miracle, but it might be about us. Now I know that they weren't thinking about 21st century Floridians when the Gospel of Mark was written. But might we be as blind as Bartimaeus? Do we have eyes to see? Or maybe we're not to connect with Bartimaeus. There's another group of people there that we could connect with, and that is the people who were around Bartimaeus. The people that were around Bartimaeus, if we go back to the passage and we hear it, what were they doing? Were they encouraging Bartimaeus? No, they were telling him, pipe down. This isn't your place. This rabbi is not for you. Why don't you go back to your place, to the side of the road as a beggar? Stop bothering us. We don't have time for you. The story is clearly not about Jesus or the miracle, but it might be about the action. And the action is jumping in. Bartimaeus actually jumped right on in. He was blind. He didn't know what he was jumping into. There was this thought that maybe, just maybe, I'll triple over myself and I'll get hurt. Or maybe I'll hurt somebody else. But he heard that Jesus of Nazareth was nearby, and he knew in his heart that that's Jesus, son of David. Now, what does that mean in first century Jewish terms? It means that Jesus is royalty. He's royalty. He's the king. He's the heir to the throne. He's the one that we have to kneel to. He is divine. It was a moment, an all or nothing moment. Now, we've all had our all or nothing moment, haven't we? We've all, at one point or another, knew that it's either now or never. And that's what it was for Bartimaeus. At that time, Bartimaeus went ahead and said, I can't see, I don't know what's happening, but I'm going to jump in and I'm going to start screaming, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. And then people were telling him to pipe down, but he insisted. He insisted and he persisted and he continued to do it. Why? Well, because he knew that this was it. This was the last moment. This would be the last chance. And as it would happen to be, he was able to get healed. Now, whenever we read the Gospels, we need to ask the following question. What is the Gospel asking me to do? Always consider that as you're reading the Bible. What is this Gospel asking me to do? Okay, so if we're reading the Gospel of the prodigal son in that story, right, we're being asked to forgive. It's a passage about forgiveness. If we are reading the story of the Samaritan, the Good Samaritan, what is it that we're being asked to do? Well, we're being asked to expand our concept of neighbor. If we're reading the story of the mustard seed, What's that gospel story asking us to do? Well, to consider God and the power of God in the smallest of things and how it has the power to just completely take over. So in this story, what is the gospel asking us to do? I think the gospel is asking us to be intentional Christians, to jump in with intention. We can no longer sit back. We can no longer afford to be observers. We now have to be active players. We have to intentionally live out our faith. Now, you've heard me say this before. You've heard Keith say it before. This is what we say week after week, Sunday after Sunday, sermon after sermon. It's almost similar to the healings of Jesus. By the time you get to the 10th chapter, you've seen so many that this comes across. So then by the time you get to this Sunday, you've heard me say this so many different times that you might say, well, what's different this week from last week? What's different from this healing of Jesus from the other healings? And it's all in the context. It's all in what's happening around. And it's in how the people respond. Let's take a look at our context. Let's take a look at the last 72 hours. Because it's been a rough 72 hours. It began on Wednesday. On Wednesday, in Kentucky, at a Kroger store, a man shot 2 African Americans. And that's only because he was unable to get into the Baptist church, predominantly African American, and to do a hate crime there. It was a crime that puts us face to face with racial hate. 2 days later, in the news, it was resolved that the suspect for all the different mail bombs is apprehended. And we got to see the portrait of a man who puts us face to face with the crimes of political hate. A man motivated by a new kind of hatred that we haven't seen. And then yesterday, 29 people were killed in a synagogue in Pittsburgh, putting us face to face with anti-Semitic hate. Hate is running amok, it sure seems. Now, we might say that hate has always been there. That's true. But what's happening? What's going on that it's being concentrated in such a way? And we know that hate never wins. And the long arc of the universe, it always bends towards justice and love. And hate is something that we could do something about it. What's the gospel calling us to do? What is it that we're to do with all this hate around us? As we are listening to the story of Bartimaeus and considering where are we in this story? So what's the strategy? What's the game plan? We've gathered here today. We're going to go out into a difficult world full of hate, full of toxic minds that are willing to end somebody's life. What's the game plan? Is it to get more guns? Is it to go ahead and put a gun in everybody's purse and everybody's pocket, as it has been suggested? Well, with the cross behind me and the image of Jesus before me, I'm not going to suggest that at all. The Prince of Peace would not want us to do that. Maybe the game plan is something that's a little bit more transformative, something that changes hearts and minds. In the same way that darkness is overcome by light, maybe we ought to overcome hatred with love. Maybe we ought to become the messengers of love. The game plan is for us to become like Bartimaeus. That's the game plan. We are in an all or nothing moment. The divine has crossed in front of us, and we have to do something. We have to jump in. But like Bartimaeus, we might be blind. We may not know exactly what we're jumping into. Like Bartimaeus, we may not know if we're going to get hurt in the process. But like Bartimaeus, we have to be full of faith and just do it. And knowing that the Son of David will have mercy on us. In our daily living, whether it be at the grocery store or at the office or in our neighborhood or talking to other family members, we must confront hate, even in its smallest and most meaningless forms. Even if it's just a little tiny glimmer of it, we know that just the thought will lead to the words, and the words will lead to more words, which will lead then to action. So let us confront it. Let us confront the hate with love. Now you might ask me, Guillermo, how are we going to do that? I'll tell you in another sermon, because today I got to catch a plane. But you already know how. You already know how, and that is to have trust in God. Trust in God. If we are constantly having trust in God, if we have faith in God, if we are in prayer with God, we know that when the moment comes before us, we could jump and God will lead us and guide us, and we will say the right thing, we will do the right thing, we will help that person deal with his or her bias, his or her hatred, his or her violent nature. And we will help transform that moment. Today is a day where we have an opportunity to turn our lives over to God. We turn our lives over to God, we remember some of those biblical words, God is love. So if we trust God, we trust love. Let love guide you. Let love find the way. Amen. Now is the time when we ask our ushers to come forward to collect an offering. This is an offering of love. It's an offering to help this church with its many different ministries to transform hearts and mind, to make this world better for all people. So we ask you to give, and to give cheerfully, to give generously. Will the ushers please come forward to receive this morning's offering?